The Resolute drifted in the black void, its battered hull scarred from days of relentless combat. Captain Lena Valorous stood at the bridge, eyes scanning the flickering holographic displays. The hum of the ship's emergency systems was a constant, a grim reminder that the battle was far from over. Her crew was exhausted. Some had not slept in days, their faces pale with fatigue. The once proud warship now seemed like little more than a floating wreck, a symbol of humanity's desperate last stand. "Captain," Commander Garrett's voice crackled through the static. "The Exurics are closing in. They're 5 minutes out." Valorous clenched her fists, her knuckles white. The Exuric's dominion had decimated the human fleet, leaving only a handful of warships alive, and now the Resolute was humanity's final hope. The Exurics were an unstoppable force, alien, brutal, and relentless. But there had to be something left to fight for. There had to be a way to win. She turned to Garrett, who was standing by the comms station. "Any chance of reinforcements?" "None," he replied, shaking his head. "We're on our own. It's just us." A cold silence filled the bridge. The crew's despair hung heavy in the air. The last of humanity's military might was about to be wiped out. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Captain Valorous felt a flicker of something. A thought, a possibility, something she'd heard whispers about during the war's early days. A myth that had kept her going during the darkest hours. The flame. "Captain." Garrett spoke again, his voice quiet but urgent. "There's been an encrypted transmission. It's an old military frequency. A distress signal, but it doesn't match any known codes." Valorous straightened, her heart rate spiking. "Play it." The signal was faint, distorted by years of silence, but the message was clear enough. To any survivors, the flame, it's real. A weapon. Only humanity can wield. Coordinates attached. The transmission ended abruptly, as if the speaker had been cut off mid-sentence. A long, unsettling silence followed. Valorous felt the weight of the message in her chest. The flame, a weapon that had been spoken of in hushed tones among the commanders and strategists, a weapon so powerful that it could shift the balance of the entire war. But it had always been dismissed as nothing more than a legend, an old story from the darkest days of the war. "Is it possible?" Garrett asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Could it be real?" Valorous took a deep breath, fighting the surge of hope that threatened to overtake her. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." She turned to the rest of the bridge crew. "Plot a course. We're going to the coordinates." The Resolute's engines sputtered to life, a strained rumble that vibrated through the ship as it shifted course, heading for the unknown. But as Valorous looked out into the infinite expanse of space, the Exuric's fleet looming just beyond their reach, she knew this was no longer just a mission. This was humanity's last chance, a gamble, a desperate play for survival. And as the ship sped toward its destination, the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. The flame could be their salvation, or it could be another dead end. But one thing was certain, the Resolute wasn't going down without a fight. Valorous leaned forward in her seat, her eyes narrowing as the stars ahead seemed to blur with the weight of what was to come. A faint whisper of a thought crossed her mind. If we fail, we die. But if they succeeded, the galaxy might just have a chance. The Resolute exited the warp in a distant sector of space, its destination a planet buried beneath centuries of neglect. The coordinates in the transmission had led them here. A desolate world, its surface scarred by ancient cataclysms, its once thriving civilization now reduced to dust. A faint signal persisted in the atmosphere, barely detectable, but it was enough to guide them down. Valorous stood at the helm, her mind racing. The ship's engines hummed low, struggling to maintain power as the crew navigated the hostile planet's dense atmosphere. The towering structures below resembled ruins more than anything else, but as they descended into the planet's shadowed valleys, there was a faint sense of something more beneath the surface, a pulse, an energy that had not yet completely faded. "Captain, we're approaching the landing zone," Garrett called from his station. "Do we have clearance to land?" Valorous asked, her voice steady but filled with tension. "Negative. We're picking up strange energy fluctuations," Garrett replied. "It's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's almost like the planet is alive." Valorous felt a chill race down her spine. The idea that something could survive this long after the collapse of civilization was both fascinating and terrifying. "Prepare to land. I want a full scan of the area once we touch down." The Resolute descended, its landing gear touching the cracked surface with a metallic thud. The planet's surface, covered in jagged terrain, seemed to pulse faintly, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "Everyone, suit up. We don't know what we're dealing with here," Valorous ordered, her tone sharp. "Prepare for hostile conditions." The crew quickly donned their exosuits, readying themselves for whatever lay ahead. Valorous surveyed her team, Garrett, the ever-loyal commander, Dr. Celine Dracos, their chief scientist, Lieutenant Vargas, a brilliant tactician, and Sergeant Dax, the ship's gruff veteran soldier. They were the heart of the crew, and today they would need to be stronger than ever. The team moved through the ship's airlock and onto the planet's surface. The air was thin, but breathable. The ground was uneven, strewn with shards of ancient stone that crunched beneath their boots. The ruins ahead were vast, stretching for miles. Towering spires rose from the dust, half buried in sand, their once pristine surfaces marred by the ravages of time. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Valorous couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of their suits' systems. Dr. Dracos scanned the air with her portable equipment, frowning as she analyzed the data. "The energy signature we detected earlier, it's coming from beneath the surface," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "There's something alive down there, something ancient." Valorous felt a knot tighten in her stomach. They had come for the flame, but it seemed as though the planet itself held secrets that had been long buried, secrets that were not meant to be uncovered. A low rumble echoed through the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't an earthquake. Something was shifting, something moving beneath the ruins. "Captain," Vargas said, his voice low and urgent, "we're not alone." Before Valorous could respond, the ground ahead of them cracked open with a deafening sound. Massive, mechanical figures emerged from the depths, towering over them like forgotten giants. Their eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and their movements were slow but deliberate, as if awakening from a centuries-long slumber. "Guardian constructs," Dr. Dracos whispered. "They were built to protect something. But what?" The machines began to move toward them, their enormous forms blocking the path forward. Valorous raised her weapon, signaling for the crew to prepare for combat. The Guardians' movements were precise, deliberate, too coordinated to be a random occurrence. "This is it," Valorous said, her voice hardening. "They're guarding the flame." The ground trembled once more as the Guardians advanced, their massive steps shaking the ruins. Valorous took a deep breath, readying herself. There was no turning back now. They had come too far, and the secrets of this dead world would either save them or destroy them. "Ready yourselves," Valorous shouted. "We fight our way through." The sound of clashing metal, and the hum of energy shields filled the air as the battle for the flame began. The battle with the ancient guardians was fierce. The mechanical giants towered over the crew, their movements slow but calculated, each step shaking the ground beneath them. Their weapons, energy-based and devastating, cut through the air, forcing the crew to take cover behind crumbling structures. Valorous' heart raced as she fired her blaster at one of the guardians, watching the energy bolt glance off its metallic hide. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't afford to be pinned down here." Sergeant Dax, always quick on his feet, dashed from cover to cover, providing suppressing fire as the rest of the team advanced. "These things don't give up," he grunted, his weapon barely making a dent in the Guardian's armor. "Focus on the joints," Dr. Dracos shouted from behind a shattered wall. "The weak points are in the limbs. Aim for the knees and elbows." Valorous took a breath and, with a nod, signaled Garrett to follow her. Together, they flanked one of the Guardians, aiming for the vulnerable joints Dr. Dracos had mentioned. As they opened fire, the Guardian staggered, its massive leg jerking before it fell to its knees, letting out a mechanical screech. "Nice shot," Garrett called out, but Valorous didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere. Her instincts told her that the real threat was still ahead. These Guardians were nothing more than a test, a diversion, and she wasn't wrong. As the last of the Guardians crumbled to the ground, a voice crackled over their comms. "You're wasting your time, Captain Valorous." Valorous froze. Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar, too familiar. "Jorath?" she asked, her voice low. The name sent a chill through her spine. "What the hell are you doing here?" The voice of Jorath, a former Exorix scientist who had defected to the human cause years ago, filtered through the static. "I should have known you'd make it this far," he said, his tone cold, but tinged with something else, something darker. "But you're too late. The flame is mine now. You've already lost." A cold fury burned in Valorous's chest. Jorath had been their ally, a trusted asset in the war against the Exorix. He had provided invaluable intelligence, even helped design countermeasures to their enemies' weapons. But now, he was talking as though the Resolute's mission was doomed. "Jorath, what are you talking about?" Valorous demanded. "We came here to save humanity. The flame is our last chance." There was a long pause before Jorath's voice came through again, but this time it was laced with contempt. "You don't get it, do you, Captain? The flame was never meant to save humanity. It was meant to destroy it." Valorous's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "Humanity was never the true target of the Exorix," Jorath continued, his words cutting deep. "You've been led to believe that the Exorix are an unstoppable force. But the truth is, the Exorix are nothing more than a puppet, and the flame is their weapon. It's not a weapon for your survival, it's a tool for extinction, and I've been helping them unlock it, all along." The weight of his words hit Valorous like a physical blow. She had trusted Jorath, believed in his cause. How could he betray them like this? Was everything a lie? Was the fight they had been waging against the Exorix all for nothing? "You're lying," Valorous snarled, gripping her weapon tightly. "You have to be lying." But there was no answer, only static. And then, from somewhere deep within the ruins, the ground trembled once more. This time, the shaking was stronger, more deliberate, as if something vast and terrible was awakening. Dr. Dracos glanced nervously at Valorous. "Captain, something's happening." "Where's Jorath?" Garrett demanded, his gaze scanning the surrounding terrain, searching for any sign of the traitor. "He's gone," Valorous said bitterly, her voice full of anger and disbelief. "And we've been played." The walls of the ancient city began to shift. Massive stone doors, long dormant, groaned open. The pulse of energy from below grew louder, and the unmistakable sound of machinery grinding into life filled the air. The flame wasn't just a weapon, it was a trap. Suddenly, a blinding light burst from within the heart of the ruins, and an enormous figure emerged from the depths. It was not a guardian, but something far more powerful. A colossal machine, a relic of a lost civilization, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. Valorous' pulse quickened as she realized what was happening. The flame was no longer just a myth. It was a force that could reshape the galaxy. And now, with Jorath's betrayal, it was in the hands of their enemies. "Move!" Valorous shouted, shaking herself from the shock. "Get to the flame before it's too late." The team rushed toward the heart of the ruin, but the giant machine stirred, blocking their path with its enormous, indestructible form. A sense of dread washed over Valorous. Jorath's words echoed in her mind. "It's a tool for extinction." But humanity had no choice now. They had to fight. They had to stop the flame, or everything they fought for would be lost. The battle for the flame was only beginning. The towering machine before them loomed like a shadow from another age, its massive form blocking the entrance to the inner sanctum of the ruin. Its body shimmered with faint lines of energy, and its glowing eyes fixed on Valorous and her team as though it were studying them, analyzing every movement, every breath. "We're not getting past this thing without a fight," Lieutenant Vargas said, his voice tight with urgency. "We'll need heavy firepower to take it down." Valorous nodded, her gaze never leaving the colossal figure. "We don't have the luxury of time. We push through, or we die here." The machine shifted slightly, its mechanical joints creaking as it began to move. With a roar that seemed to reverberate through the very air around them, it raised one of its massive arms, a weapon of unimaginable power concealed within. Valorous didn't wait for it to strike. "Fall back," she barked. "Scatter." Her crew reacted instantly, splitting up and seeking cover. The first shot from the machine came in a blinding flash of energy. It tore through the air, crashing into the ground where Valorous had been standing only seconds before. The impact sent debris flying, and the explosion rocked the entire structure, shaking the walls and sending dust and stone tumbling to the ground. "We need to hit it hard," Sergeant Dax shouted, rolling behind a broken pillar to avoid the next volley. "Aim for the joints." Valorous raised her own weapon, focusing on the machine's exposed joints, hoping the weakness Dr. Dracos had mentioned earlier still applied. She fired, her shots concentrated on its legs, but the beams merely deflected off the heavy armor, leaving the machine undeterred. "I've got an idea," Dr. Dracos called from behind a fallen column. "The energy source, it's central, a core buried in the chest of the machine. If we can overload it, we might be able to destroy it from the inside." "How the hell do we do that?" Garrett asked, reloading his weapon as he provided covering fire. "We need to get close enough to plant a charge," Dr. Dracos said, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "If we can draw its attention away for just a moment, I can place the device." Valorous didn't hesitate. "Do it. We'll cover you." The team adjusted their positions, spreading out and firing in unison, drawing the machine's attention. The massive creature seemed to focus on them, its glowing eyes narrowing, its weapon charging with deadly intent. Valorous dove for cover behind a nearby broken wall, heart pounding in her chest. They needed just a few more moments. "On my mark," Valorous said, her voice steady. "Garrett Dax, take the left flank. Vargas, Dracos, stay close and move on my signal." The crew moved as one, shifting into position. The machine responded with another devastating blast of energy, scattering them once more. Valorous kept her head down, calculating the angles. This had to work. Failure wasn't an option. No. Valorous shouted, springing to her feet and signaling her team. They rushed forward, drawing the machine's attention as Dr. Dracos, crouching low, sprinted toward the center of the machine's form, her hands clutching the experimental explosive device. The massive machine roared, its arms sweeping toward her with terrifying speed. Dax and Garrett moved to intercept, firing at its massive form to distract it long enough for Dr. Dracos to reach the machine's chest. Dr. Dracos reached the giant and ducked beneath its sweeping arm just as it came crashing down, barely missing her. She dropped to her knees and quickly began attaching the device to the machine's glowing core. Valorous could hear the charging hum of the weapon in the machine's other arm, a pulse of energy that could obliterate them all. "Dracos, hurry!" Valorous shouted, her own weapon now trained on the massive figure. The machine's arm came down again, its weapon charging for another deadly shot. But this time they were ready. Dax and Garrett dove forward, unleashing a barrage of fire that briefly caused the machine to stagger, its internal systems malfunctioning from the sustained hits. Dr. Dracos pressed the final component into place, her hands shaking with the intensity of the moment. "It's set." She yelled, standing up and bolting back toward cover. Valorous didn't wait for another second. Everyone fall back. The team sprinted away from the machine, racing for cover as the massive form loomed overhead, completely unaware of what was coming. A final pulse of energy surged through the ruin, and then, with a deafening roar, the explosive device detonated. The machine screamed in agony, its body cracking open as the core exploded with a brilliant flash of white light. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the ruins, knocking Valorous and her crew off their feet. The ground beneath them shook violently, and for a moment everything went white. As the light faded, Valorous slowly pushed herself to her feet, blinking away the spots in her vision. The ruins were now eerily quiet, the air thick with smoke and dust. Her team, though shaken, were all alive. "Is it over?" Garrett asked, his voice hoarse. Valorous glanced toward the ruins where the machine had stood moments before. The massive form was now reduced to a pile of smoldering wreckage, its pieces scattered across the ground. The path to the inner sanctum was clear. "Not yet," Valorous said grimly. "The flame is still ahead." The real challenge lay beyond the wreckage, what they would find in the heart of this dead world. The flame was still waiting, and with Jorah's betrayal still fresh in their minds, the danger had only just begun. They moved forward, each step heavier than the last, knowing that the greatest trial was yet to come. The ruined city stretched before them, its once great walls now crumbled and battered by centuries of neglect. Despite the destruction, the air held a strange reverence, a silence that seemed to hang like a heavy fog over the crew. They moved cautiously, weapons ready, every sense on high alert. The path to the heart of the ruin was clear, but Valorous could feel the weight of something far more dangerous ahead. Jorah's betrayal still stung like a fresh wound, and the realization that they had been led into a trap gnawed at her with each passing step. "Keep your eyes open," Valorous murmured to her team as they approached the entrance to the central chamber. The stone archway loomed ahead, intricately carved with symbols she couldn't begin to decipher. The air grew colder as they drew closer, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that sent an uneasy chill through her spine. Dr. Dracos stepped forward, scanning the door with her equipment. "This structure, it's not like anything we've seen before. The technology is far beyond anything humanity could have built. Valoris nodded, her mind racing. She had to stay focused. The flame was ahead, and it was their only hope. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into something far darker than they had imagined. With a loud grinding sound, the ancient stone doors slowly began to open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, and in the center of the room stood an altar-like structure, bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. "That's it," Vargas said, his voice hushed in awe. "That's the flame." At the center of the altar stood a crystalline core, its surface shimmering with a pulsating energy, almost alive. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, its light casting strange shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. Valoris could feel the heat radiating from it, despite the coldness of the chamber. The flame was real, and it was far more powerful than they could have imagined. "Is it a weapon?" Dr. Dracos whispered, her voice tinged with both awe and fear. Valoris studied the structure, her mind racing to make sense of it. The machine they had fought to reach here had been guarding something far greater than they had anticipated. This was not just a weapon, it was the key to something far larger. And they weren't the only ones interested in it. "Captain," Garrett's voice broke through her thoughts, urgent and filled with warning. "We're not alone." Valoris turned sharply, her heart racing. Emerging from the shadows of the chamber were figures, tall, cloaked in dark, flowing robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They moved with purpose, their presence almost spectral. Their footsteps echoed unnervingly in the vast chamber, and as they drew closer, the air seemed to thrum with an unnatural energy. "Who are they?" Dax asked, his hand tightening around his weapon. "I don't know," Valoris replied, her instincts screaming at her. "But they're here for the flame, just like us." The figures halted just outside the radius of the altar, their presence filling the room like a heavy fog. One of them stepped forward, his movements graceful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was calm, yet carried an air of authority that made Valoris's blood run cold. "You have come for the flame," the figure said, his voice smooth, almost soothing. "But you are too late." Valoris tightened her grip on her blaster, ready for whatever confrontation awaited. "Who are you? What do you want with the flame?" The figure raised a hand, and the room seemed to grow colder. "We are the keepers. The flame is not yours to take. It is a force beyond your comprehension, a power that, once unleashed, will reshape the galaxy. It is not a weapon for the survival of your species. It is a force of judgment." "Judgment?" Valoris echoed, her mind spinning. "What are you talking about?" "We need the flame to stop the Exurix. We need it to survive." The Keeper's eyes glinted with an almost pitying expression. "You misunderstand. The flame is not a tool for your survival. It is the final cleansing. A reckoning for the corruption that has plagued this galaxy for millennia. The Exurix are but one symptom. You humans, you too are part of the problem." Valoris's chest tightened as the weight of the words pressed down on her. These cloaked figures were not simply guardians of the flame, they were its custodians, its true wielders, and they had been waiting for this moment. "You're saying that humanity deserves to be destroyed." Garrett growled, stepping forward, his tone filled with fury. "After everything we've been through. After everything we fought for." The Keeper's expression did not change. The galaxy has been diseased by greed, by war, by endless cycles of violence. The flame will purge it all, and when it is done, only the worthy will remain. Valoris's pulse quickened as she took in the Keeper's words. These beings were not just interested in controlling the flame. They believed in its power to eradicate entire civilizations, and humanity was in the crosshairs. "We won't let you use it," Valorous said, her voice steady, resolute. "The flame may be powerful, but we'll fight for our survival. We won't let you destroy us." The Keeper's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Then you will be judged as well." With a flick of his wrist, the Keepers moved in unison, their cloaks billowing like shadows. The room seemed to darken, the air thick with the sense of impending doom. The battle for the flame was no longer just about possession. It was about life and death. And now the true test of humanity's will to survive had begun. Valorous stood tall, a resolve unshaken. They had come this far. They would not back down now. The tension in the chamber thickened, the Keeper's presence like a looming storm. Their dark cloaks fluttered as they took deliberate steps toward the flame, their hands raised in a silent command. The room seemed to hum with the power that surged from the crystal core in the center, and for the first time, Valorous truly understood the magnitude of what they were facing. This was no ordinary weapon. The flame was a living force, and those who sought it, whether to wield it for salvation or destruction, would have to pay a terrible price. "Move!" Valorous shouted, snapping her team into action. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the Keeper's words pressing heavily upon her. They couldn't let the flame fall into their hands. Humanity's survival depended on it. Dax and Garrett sprinted toward the outer perimeter of the chamber, positioning themselves to flank the Keepers. Dr. Dracos, ever the scientist, was already digging into her pack, pulling out devices meant for more than just protection. She was working on a way to counter the strange energy field that seemed to pulse from the altar. "Get to the flame now," Valorous urged, her voice sharp. She knew what they had to do. If they could just disable the altar, the flame's power could be neutralized. But every step was a risk, and the Keepers moved with an eerie precision, closing in with every passing second. The lead Keeper raised a hand, and the chamber grew colder still. Valorous felt the air shift as if it had turned to solid ice, and the crackling energy around the altar intensified. The Keeper's eyes glowed, their presence growing more formidable with every passing moment. "You have no idea what you are dealing with," Captain Valorous, the Keeper who had spoken earlier, said, his voice calm, but heavy with ancient authority. "The flame is beyond your understanding. It is not just a weapon. It is the culmination of millennia of design, a tool of balance in a universe on the brink of destruction. You cannot stop it." "Then we die trying," Valorous spat, her words sharp with defiance. Her hand tightened around her blaster, and she fired at one of the advancing Keepers. The energy blast hit him square in the chest, but instead of falling, the Keeper simply absorbed the shot, his body rippling as though the energy had been absorbed into his very being. Valorous's eyes widened in disbelief. "What the hell are they?" The Keeper's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "We are the last of those who once wielded the flame, and now we have come to see it reborn." Before Valorous could respond, the room filled with a sharp, high-pitched whine. The altar, responding to the Keeper's presence, began to glow brighter, its pulse of energy synchronized with the Keeper's movements. A crackling beam of power shot from the core, streaking toward the team. "Get down!" Valorous shouted, pushing Dr. Dracos to the ground just as the beam crashed into the far wall with enough force to send debris tumbling from the ceiling. The explosion rang in their ears, and dust filled the air. The Keeper in the center motioned again, and this time a shimmering barrier formed around the flame, a force field that pulsed with energy. It was impenetrable. Whatever they had planned, they couldn't get close to it without neutralizing the field first. "We need to break through that barrier," Dr. Dracos called out, her eyes darting to the screen of her portable scanner. But it's linked to the flame. If we try to interfere, the flame will react violently. We could trigger a catastrophic release of energy. Then we make a choice, Valorous said, her mind already working through the plan. We can't let them take it. We'll have to risk it. Garrett and Dax moved in unison, flanking the Keepers, firing carefully aimed shots to disrupt their focus. But the Keepers responded with unnatural speed, deflecting the blasts with ease and advancing relentlessly toward the altar. The lead Keeper's eyes glowed even brighter as he held his hand out toward Valorous. The air seemed to bend in response, a gravitational pull sucking her forward against her will. She fought it, her boots digging into the stone floor, but the force was overwhelming. Her heart pounded as she struggled against the invisible grip, her body pulled helplessly toward the Keeper. "You will understand soon," the Keeper said softly, his voice like a whisper against the roar of the battle. "The flame is not meant to be controlled. It is the reckoning of your species. And once it is unleashed, you will see your place in the universe." Valorous could feel herself being drawn in, her vision narrowing as the Keeper's power surged. But then, a sharp blast from Dax's rifle hit the Keeper in the side, distracting him long enough for Valorous to break free. She staggered back, gasping for breath, her body aching from the strain. "We have to move now," Valorous shouted, regaining her footing and turning to her team. "Dracos, start the countermeasure. Vargas, cover her. Dax, Garrett, you're with me. We take them down." The team split into two groups. Dr. Dracos moved quickly, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the device in her pack, trying to hack into the flame's system. Vargas stayed close, his weapon trained on the Keepers, ready to fire if they moved. Valorous and her team of two advanced toward the Keepers. They would break the barrier, no matter the cost. The battle for the flame was not just about winning, it was about ensuring humanity's future. And Valorous was determined to see it through, no matter the odds. The chamber crackled with energy as the Keepers moved with terrifying precision, their eyes glowing with an ethereal light, seemingly immune to the weapons Valorous and her team wielded. Every shot fired by Garrett and Dax was either deflected or absorbed, as though the Keepers were attuned to the energy of their attacks. The team's options were running thin, and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. "Dracos, how long?" Valorous demanded, her voice rising above the chaos. Her eyes never left the lead Keeper, whose intense gaze seemed to pierce through her, as if he were searching her very soul. "I'm close," Dr. Dracos called back, her voice tight with concentration. "The flame's energy signature is unique. It's not just powering the barrier, it's binding it. If I can isolate the core's signal, I might be able to disable the field, but I need more time." A massive surge of energy erupted from the altar, sending a shockwave through the room. Valorous barely ducked in time as the blast passed overhead, obliterating part of the wall behind them. "Move," she shouted, grabbing Dr. Dracos by the arm and pulling her further into the chamber. The team formed a loose defensive perimeter, each member moving with practiced precision to protect the scientist. The lead Keeper moved forward, his hand outstretched, summoning a dark energy that rippled through the air like a wave of pressure. With a low, reverberating hum, he sent a shockwave toward them, sending Dax crashing into a stone pillar. The blast threw him to the ground with a sickening thud, his weapon skittering away from him. "Get up," Garrett shouted, his voice strained with urgency. But Dax was already on his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. His rifle was gone, but his sidearm was still holstered. He gripped it tightly as he rejoined the fight. "We can't keep this up forever," Garrett muttered under his breath, shooting rapidly at another keeper. But it was futile. Each shot was absorbed by the shimmering barrier surrounding them. Valorous' thoughts raced. The keepers were too powerful. They weren't just defenders, they were avatars of the flame itself, beings whose existence seemed linked to the ancient power pulsing from the altar. Every blow they dealt felt like it tore at the very fabric of reality, and every second they wasted was another step closer to losing everything. But there was no time for doubt. "Dracos!" Valorous called again, her eyes fixed on the woman's trembling form. "How much longer?" "I'm almost there," Dr. Dracos yelled, her fingers flying across the device's interface. The small, glowing screen flickered, struggling to process the energy coming from the core. She was fighting against the very essence of the flame, and every second counted. The lead keeper's eyes narrowed, and he lifted his hand once more. This time, he didn't send a blast of energy. He projected a beam of purer will, a dark, twisting force that bent the very air around him. Valorous barely managed to dive out of the way, her body slamming into the cold stone floor. She could feel the force of the energy as it passed mere inches from her, a scorching heat that left the air thick with ionized particles. "Stay down," Vargas barked, firing at the keeper from a distance. His shots barely slowed the keeper's advance. "Dracos!" Valorous yelled again, desperation creeping into her voice. "Do it now." Dr. Dracos looked up, her face pale with the strain of the task. Her hands were shaking, and the device in her grip was blinking erratically. Just one more there. With a swift motion, she slammed her hand down on the device's final control. There was a moment of silence, and then a low, vibrating hum filled the chamber. The barrier flickered, then sputtered, before vanishing entirely in a burst of energy that sent a shockwave through the room. The keepers recoiled as the power of the flame began to destabilize, their control over it slipping. "Now's our chance," Valorous shouted. "Take them down." The team surged forward, weapons raised. Garrett and Dax led the charge, firing with deadly accuracy at the nearest keeper. The lead keeper turned, his eyes narrowing in fury as he raised his hand to strike back. But before he could unleash his wrath, Valorous closed the distance, throwing herself into the fight. With a swift, practiced movement, she slammed her combat knife into the keeper's side, her arm shaking with the force of the blow. The keeper's body flickered, its form glitching like a corrupted image. For a moment, it seemed as though the keeper would disintegrate into nothingness, but instead, the blade's impact released a massive burst of energy that pushed Valorous back, sending her crashing into the stone wall. "Captain," Garrett cried, but Valorous struggled to rise, the world spinning around her. The keeper's form began to dissolve, its body disintegrating into glowing particles. But before it was completely gone, its voice echoed through the chamber, cold and filled with finality. "You cannot stop the flame. The reckoning has already begun." The keeper's body evaporated entirely, leaving nothing but a shimmering cloud of energy that quickly faded. The room fell into an eerie silence. The remaining keepers faltered, their strength visibly waning as the flame's energy continued to destabilize. Dr. Dracos, her face flushed with exhaustion, glanced up. I think we've done it. The flame's control is broken, but there's no telling what will happen now." Valorous, still groggy but resolute, pushed herself to her feet. The heart of the flame was vulnerable, but for how long? They had bought themselves a moment, but the galaxy's fate was still hanging by a thread. "We fight until the end," Valorous said, her voice steely. "We'll survive this. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The team nodded in agreement, bracing for the next wave of challenges. The battle was far from over, and the true test of humanity's strength was just beginning. The chamber was quiet, save for the faint hum of the destabilizing flame. The eerie glow of the crystal core flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, as if the very heart of the galaxy's hope was on the verge of collapse. The keepers had fallen, but the real battle was far from over. The flame had been unleashed, but what would it mean for humanity? Valorous stood, her body still aching from the earlier onslaught, but her resolve only hardened. They had bought themselves time, but time was a luxury they couldn't afford. The Exoryx were still out there, and the galaxy's survival rested on them reclaiming the flame's power before it was too late. "Dracos, what's the status?" Valorous asked, her voice sharp with determination. She could hear the urgency in her own tone. It was a feeling that had become all too familiar in the wake of this war. Dr. Dracos wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands trembling from the exertion. "The core is destabilizing faster than I anticipated. The energy field is fluctuating, and we don't have long before it either burns out completely or causes a massive explosion. We need to either stabilize it or shut it down completely." Valorous exchanged a glance with Garrett, Dax, and Vargas. "We'll stabilize it. If the flame can still be harnessed, we need to make it work. Humanity's only hope depends on it." "But how do we control it now?" Garrett asked, his voice low. The keepers were the flame's custodians. If they couldn't control it, what makes us think we can? "We don't have a choice," Valorous said, her eyes narrowing. "We fought too hard to let it slip away now." She moved toward the altar, every step measured, every muscle tense. The flame's energy surged in the air, crackling like static, making her hair stand on end. It was like standing next to a supernova, powerful, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. But it was also their only weapon against the Exoryx, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. As she reached the central altar, she hesitated for only a moment. The core was no longer just a tool. It had become an entity unto itself, radiating with an ancient intelligence. It was alive, its energy swirling in unpredictable patterns, reacting to her presence. "Dracos, get ready," Valorous said, turning back to the team. "We need to reroute the energy flow. If we can channel it into a sustainable output, we can use it against the Exoryx." Dr. Dracos nodded, moving swiftly to join her side. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steely, though her eyes betrayed the fear she was trying to suppress. The team spread out, guarding the perimeter as Valorous approached the core. The energy within the room pulsed harder, faster. It felt like a heartbeat, the flame's heartbeat, and she could almost hear it in her mind, calling to her. "Okay," Dr. Dracos said, pulling out a set of tools. "I'll need to reconfigure the power matrix. If we can sync the core's frequency with the ship's systems, we might be able to harness its power for a limited time." "You've got one shot," Valorous reminded her, her gaze never leaving the flame. "We can't afford any mistakes." Dr. Dracos set to work, the hum of her devices filling the room as she interfaced with the ancient technology. The core's glow intensified, and for a moment, Valorous felt her mind slip into a strange trance-like state. It was as if the flame was calling to her, drawing her in, testing her will. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. "Captain," Dax called, his voice strained. "We've got company." Valorous's heart skipped a beat. No, this was too soon. The Exoryx couldn't have found them already. They still had time, didn't they? She turned to see a dark shape materializing at the entrance to the chamber. Then another, and another. The Exoryx warship had arrived, and with it, a legion of their warriors, their grotesque, insectoid forms silhouetted in the doorway. They advanced with chilling precision, weapons drawn, their intent clear. They were here to finish what the Keepers had started. "Dracos!" Valorous shouted, her voice laced with panic. "Hurry up." Dr. Dracos's hands flew across the interface, sweat pouring down her face. I'm trying. Just give me a few more seconds." The Exyrix warriors were closing in, their movements fast, predatory. Garrett, Dax, and Vargas opened fire, their blaster shots tearing into the first wave of attackers. But the Exyrix were relentless, their armored bodies absorbing the hits with ease. Valorous' heart raced as she drew her blaster and fired into the oncoming horde, her shots finding their marks, but doing little to slow them down. "Come on, Dracos," Valorous muttered under her breath, her finger tightening on the trigger with each passing second. Then, suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. The core flared with energy, and the entire room seemed to shake as the flame's power surged. Dracos looked up, her face illuminated by the core's glow. "It's done," Dr. Dracos shouted. "The flame is stable. We can control it." Valorous wasted no time. Channeled the energy into the ship's weapon systems. Now. The room trembled as the flame's energy coursed through the ancient machinery, syncing with the ship's power systems. The Exyrix advanced, but Valorous felt a surge of hope. They still had a chance. "Everyone, get ready," Valorous shouted. "We fight back now. We've got the power to end this." With the flame under their control, they turned toward the advancing Exyrix, their resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their place in the galaxy, about showing the universe that humanity's will to survive was unbreakable. And now, with the flame in their hands, they would fight until the very end.